Okay, there are two main kinds of microphones that we use for audio recording. Now, there's a bunch of other kinds of microphones as well, but the two main ones that we use for studio recording are called dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. The other kinds, there are some that are more designed for theater, there are some designed for atmospheric stuff, there are some that are are designed for I don't know what, but we use them in the studio sometimes. But they're more rare, so I don't want to go into them in a ton of detail. There's some that are designed to work underwater. I spent a lot of time working with those this summer. Um, but the two standard kinds that you'll encounter most often are dynamic microphones and condenser microphones. So here are the differences. This one that you're hearing right now is a dynamic microphone. This one is a condenser microphone. So a dynamic microphone, the one you're hearing now, these typically, these are more rugged. They can take a beating. They're less fragile. They're a bit cheaper in general, and they are more or less sensitive. Now, all three of those things that I just said are kind of generalizations. There are 100 and probably 1,000 different actual microphones made that are dynamic microphones, right? So this is one called the Shure SM58. It's one of the most common microphones you'll find, but there are a bunch of other companies that make dynamic microphones. It's not unique to this microphone by any means. So dynamic microphones, they're less sensitive, they can take a beating, and they're less expensive. This microphone, I think right now they're going for about $100, $120, something like that for a new one. They've been around forever. Now you might think, why would I want a mic that's less sensitive? The reason is, if you're recording something like drums, this is a good microphone to throw in front of a kick drum, where it's just going to be like pounding, pounding, pounding. You can kind of set these and forget it some of the time, a lot of the time. You don't have to worry about getting hit with too much air and it cracking the diaphragm of the microphone or anything like that. These are also good for live. We like these as live mics because they can really take a beating. You can spill beer on them and more or less they'll usually be okay. You can throw them around. These are great live vocal mics. They're also just in general, I like them for studio recording mics. Sometimes we record with more sensitive microphones in the studio, but for vocals, I like these in the studio, especially for rappers, like I was saying before. You can get a good vocal tone out of them pretty well. So to contrast that, condenser microphones, like this one, they're a couple of different things. They're basically opposite of the three things I just said about this one. Typically, they're a bit more expensive. Typically, they're a bit more sensitive. And typically, they're a bit more fragile. So these you wouldn't want to put in front of a bass drum and just pound, pound, pound because it could break. You wouldn't want to use this live because you could break it. You wouldn't want to spill beer on it and throw it around at a live show. It's more fragile. However, there are some condenser microphones that are more rugged that can be used live. They are also much more sensitive. So for right now, the reason I'm using a dynamic microphone and not a condenser microphone is because I don't want you to hear my dog chewing on her bone in the next room over, my proximity to the airport, which hopefully you haven't noticed in watching these videos. And, when my heater kicks on in my house, hopefully all these sounds you're not hearing because I'm using a less sensitive microphone. If I use these, you probably would be able to hear all those things. In fact, I suppose I should just prove that. So I'm going to pause the video, switch microphones, and come back. Okay, here is the other microphone set to the same volume as my previous one. So it looks like that's pretty hot. So I'm going to turn it down a little bit. Check 1, 2, check, check, check. Check, 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 check. Okay, that looks a little bit better. Still looks like it's peaking. Okay. That looks a little bit better. So you can probably hear more nuance to my voice. You can hear probably more upper frequencies, more just general, maybe the fan of my computer humming a little bit. We just missed a plane flying over when I was switching microphones. In fact, I was still recording, and as I was saying, you might hear a plane flew over, and you probably didn't hear it, but if one flew over right now, you'd probably hear it. And I'm talking like significantly quieter right now because I can see on my meters that I'm coming close to hitting the top. And you don't want to do that. By hitting the top, I mean clipping the microphone, getting too loud. We'll talk more about that in a minute. My dog is being very quiet at the moment, and my heater's not on, so it's super quiet in this room right now. But hopefully you can hear quite a significant difference in all the different sounds coming out from this microphone that you didn't hear in the other microphone, right? Okay, so I'm going to switch back microphones. All right, we're back to the other microphone now. One thing I didn't mention is that these kind of microphones have one other little wrinkle to them, and that is that they require power. You have to send these power through the cable, which sounds weird, but it's not that weird. If you're using an audio interface, which I guess you kind of have to be if you're using one of these kind of microphones, you'll see a button on there somewhere called either phantom power, or it might be called plus 48V, or something like that. You need to turn that on if you're using a condenser microphone because it needs to get power. These, you don't need that on. These are powered pretty much by magnets. They don't require separate power, but these do. And what that phantom power is it's your audio interface sending power back up the cable to give the mic some juice. But you don't want it on if you're using a dynamic mic. And people always ask me, if I'm using a dynamic mic and I send it phantom power, is it going to hurt it? Probably not, but it's kind of a waste of power. So don't do that. Okay, so that's what you need to know about microphones. Now, we could talk for days and months and years about types of microphones, but that'll get you in the ballpark. I should mention this one is a microphone that I really do love. This is an Audio-Technica AT2020. This is a newer mic that came out just last year, I think, and it's really sensitive. It's really good for recording some things, and it's really inexpensive for what it is. It's a high-quality microphone at around $120, $130. So it's not all that much more expensive than this dynamic microphone I'm using, the SM58. So it's quite a good mic, especially for the expense of it. It's relatively cheap for what it is. So it's quite good. I like it. But I don't like it for recording dialogue in these classes. Okay, let's move on and talk a little bit about mic placement.